I'm often asked which of the 6 vegetable gardening methods that I've been trialing is the best. And I find this a difficult question to answer, as so much depends on context, the resources that are available, as well as the preferences and biases of the grower. And I've also been able to grow good quality vegetables in all of these gardens. There are, of course, differences between these gardens, as well as different criteria for determining what best would be. One garden could easily produce the biggest yield of a particular crop, and possibly even the largest individual plants. But would the same garden also require the least amount of time? And would they also be good quality, well-shaped vegetables that are free of pest damage, and perhaps most importantly, taste the best? If one garden produced a crop that was better than the other gardens in all 6 of these factors, then perhaps I could say that this garden produced the best crop, at least for that season. And that seems to have been the case with one crop of main crop carrots that I grew last season. The first way that I would evaluate a crop like this, and perhaps the easiest, is to compare the yield or total weight of the carrots that were harvested, divided by the area of the bed that they were grown in. For the variety of main crop carrots that I grow every year for storage, the intensive garden produced the biggest yield this season, and the extensive garden was a very close second. The no-dig garden and the simple garden both produced a decent yield, but quite a bit less than the other two. The harvest from the polytunnel garden was unexpectedly poor, though I did sow these seeds later in the summer. The polyculture garden also had a poor crop of carrots, mainly because I failed to thin the seedlings enough. But it's also difficult to determine the area devoted to carrots within this mixed cropping, so it's impossible to accurately compare the yield of one crop from this garden. So with this fairly important comparison of yield, 2 gardens did really well, 2 gardens were okay, and the yield from the last 2 were quite poor. The size of the individual carrots is less important, but larger roots are generally a sign that the carrot plant was strong and healthy. And the purpose for growing this particular variety of carrot was to produce a large crop of big roots for storage, providing that they still taste good. The average weight of the individual carrots harvested from the extensive garden was the highest of the lot, and the average weight from the intensive garden was about half that, even though it had a similar high yield. And this makes sense with the significantly higher density of a lot more plants in the same size of growing space. The carrots from the no-dig garden were the second largest, probably due to there being more space per plant because of gaps in germination. And the average size of the roots from the simple garden were about the same as the intensive garden, and the polytunnel garden produced significantly smaller roots. The carrots pulled up from the polyculture garden were also quite small, but this garden also had the largest range of root sizes, with most of them being too small to bother with. Another factor to consider is the amount of work that it took to produce a crop of carrots in each of these gardens. By this metric, the extensive garden was by far the most efficient, with almost 25 kilograms of carrots harvested for each hour of work that I put into the crop over the full season, including the preparation of the bed. The polyculture garden was the worst, with a lot of work but very little return, mainly because I didn't manage the thinning of the crop very well. The other 4 gardens all produced roughly the same, with a good yield for the effort that I put in, though there was quite a difference between the gardens. The intensive garden had a higher yield, but with more work, especially with all the weeding that I had to do because I imported a lot of viable weed seeds in the compost that I used. The polytunnel garden, on the other hand, had a low yield, but also a lot less work, as there was very little bed preparation and minimal weeding required. The no-dig garden was second highest out of the 6 gardens, and would have been even better with higher yields, and the simple garden was a lot less efficient than the others, mainly due to the time that I put in sieving the soil for this carrot bed. These first 3 factors are the only quantitative or measured comparisons that I can make based on the records and measurements that I took. But there are 3 other more qualitative factors or observations that I can use for comparison. The first of these is what proportion of the harvested roots were forked, misshapen, or cracked. While many of these carrots are still edible, they can be much more difficult and time-consuming to process and produce more waste. Interestingly, I found that almost all of the carrots from the polyculture and the polytunnel gardens to be long and straight, probably because the soil in these beds had been undisturbed for quite a while before the tender carrot roots had started to grow. 3 of the other gardens all had a number of forked or cracked roots, mixed in with lots of straight and well-shaped roots. But the no-dig garden definitely had the highest percentage of severely forked and misshapen roots. It seems that the thick layer of compost added to the surface of this garden hadn't had enough time to settle in, and quite a few of the delicate roots of the carrot seedlings were damaged or forked as a result. Another factor was the amount of pest damage, and while I was quite successful at avoiding slug damage when the plants were young, damage to the roots by carrot fly larvae was an issue once again this season. With the extensive, intensive, and simple gardens, the mesh that I used to cover the crop worked for the most part. The protection in the no-dig, polytunnel, and polyculture gardens wasn't so successful, mainly due to my failure in preventing any gaps at the edges of the mesh, or not putting it on early enough, and they all had quite serious infestation of many of the roots. An additional possible factor in the polyculture garden was that the mesh was removed much more often to tend to and harvest the other crops that were growing in amongst the carrots, and it was also off for longer during the time-consuming weeding and thinning. The idea that intercropped onions would keep the carrot fly away didn't seem to help at all. Unfortunately, a significant number of carrots in the simple garden were eaten by rats before I got around to harvesting them, so in the end, this large crop didn't escape pest damage. Perhaps the most important factor is the taste of the carrots from each of the gardens. I'm quite impressed with the flavor of this variety in general, and how tasty the roots can be even when they've grown quite big. But in order to compare the carrots that were grown in each of the different gardens, I decided to conduct a taste test when a lot of friends were over in our house for a big lunch. I cut up parts of 3 good quality carrots from each of the gardens and placed the pieces in a bowl without identifying which garden each bowl came from. I then asked everybody to taste them all and to mark each sample on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the tastiest. Most people were quite surprised that the same variety of carrot could taste so different when they're grown in different gardens. Some people had definite favorites, and others seemed to like them all despite their differences, or had trouble ranking them. The results were quite interesting, with most people giving their highest preference to the carrots from the extensive garden or the polytunnel garden, with a few preferring the polyculture garden, and 2 people liking the carrots from the no-dig garden the best. The carrot samples from the intensive and the simple gardens were not selected as a favorite by anyone. In terms of the average taste score given to each garden, the polytunnel garden was really good, even though the carrots were quite small and badly affected by carrot root fly, and the extensive garden was even better, despite having the largest roots. These 2 gardens have quite different soil preparations and growing conditions, but they are the only gardens that have put in efforts over the years to remineralize the soil based on detailed soil tests. This positive result from both of these gardens could be seen as reinforcing the idea that adequately remineralized soil produces the tastiest crops, or there could be other completely unrelated factors. The carrots from the simple garden were definitely the least preferred, which is a shame as this was the largest crop. I'm not sure what's really going on here, but it could be due to the fact that this is the newest garden, and the soil fertility and organic matter hasn't had a chance to really improve enough yet. I find it interesting that the intensive and the extensive gardens both had large yields, indicating that the plants grew quite well this season, but their taste preference was significantly different. And I'm a bit surprised that the roots from the polyculture garden were ranked 3rd, despite their poor growing conditions. I do need to remember that this is from a very small sampling of carrots, and there could be significant variability in the flavor of carrots even from within one garden, which could change the results quite a bit. But on the basis of this one taste test, the carrots from the extensive and the polytunnel garden were definitely considered tastiest. The ones from the simple garden were least preferred, with the intensive, no-dig, and polyculture gardens all in the middle. Looking at all the different factors, the extensive garden seems to have produced the best crop of storage carrots this season. The yield was almost the highest, as well as producing the largest carrots on average, as there is a lot of space for each root to grow into. The crop in this garden definitely required the least amount of work, or I was able to get the highest yield for my efforts. There were a few forked roots, and some split or damaged roots, but there was also lots of long, straight carrots, and there was minimal damage from carrot root fly or slugs. But perhaps most importantly, they were considered the tastiest of the lot, which was quite surprising given that they were so big. So it seems that this extensive garden produced the best crop of carrots, and apart from the forking of some of the roots, this crop was as good as, if not better than, all of the other gardens with all the factors that I was able to evaluate it with, and that's really cool. Of course, one crop in one season doesn't prove anything, and it will be interesting to see if this garden can produce the best crop of carrots in the next few years. But instead of seeing this as just a competition, I see this great crop of carrots from the extensive garden as a new high bar, something to aim for, and it leads me to think about what I can do to improve the crops from the other gardens. The carrots from the intensive garden were probably second best, and even though the soil has been well worked with lots of compost added over the years, I suspect that taking a soil test and amending any mineral deficiencies might really help, especially to improve the flavor. With the no-dig garden, it will be interesting to see how this crop does next year now that the large addition of compost has had a chance to settle in. The biggest issue in the polyculture garden is to thin the crop much more effectively and earlier, in order to give each plant more space, and hopefully this will dramatically improve things. It will be interesting to see how much better the crop in the polytunnel garden does if I manage to prevent any carrot root fly getting in, and the same could be said for the polyculture and no-dig gardens. And perhaps the soil in the simple garden needs a few more seasons to develop, especially as I don't add compost to this part of the crop rotation. All of these things could produce better crops, closing the gap with the extensive garden, and perhaps one of these gardens may produce a better overall crop next season. But it's also possible that the extensive garden might just have the right combination of techniques and methods that will consistently produce the best crop of carrots, at least within the context of the climate and the soil that I have to work with. And it's also possible that I might not be able to grow another crop of carrots that is as good as the one that I grew last year, but I hope not, and I don't really know how good a crop of carrots can actually get.